John Paul Stevens High School sits on the far west side of San Antonio, just a little over a mile from SeaWorld. As with other Northside ISD schools, it's named after a Supreme Court justice. Past the parking lots and the football fields, there sits a small granite memorial. This slab of pink granite on the side of the road is not a monument to John Paul, the Supreme Court justice. It's a monument to John Paul II, the Pope, the Bishop of Rome, and the leader of the Catholic Church. This September marks the 32nd anniversary of Pope John Paul II's visit to San Antonio. Like any other tourist, he visited the Alamo while he was in town, but unlike most tourists, he celebrated an outdoor mass with over 350,000 people. This memorial on the edge of a high school campus marks the spot where that mass took place. Of course, back in 1987, there wasn't much of anything this far west of town. There certainly wasn't anything that could handle a pope and 350,000 of his friends. All of that had to be built from scratch. The task of designing a temporary venue for this gigantic outdoor mass fell to 4 young designers who had recently opened a design firm known as Alamo Architects. There are lots of stories we could tell about the time the Pope came to town, but we're going to tell the architect's story in this chapter of the San Antonio Storybook, a podcast about the people and the places of the Alamo City. I'm Brantley Hightower. Billy Lawrence, Mike Lanford, Irby Hightower, and Mike McGlone are the founding partners of Alamo Architects. They worked with Jenny McChesney on the design of the outdoor mass site as well as the papal altar itself. I'll let them tell their story from here.
We were all classmates, sort of within a year of each other at UT Austin in the late 70s.
We were a young firm, about 2 years old.
There were the 4 principals, and we were working out of an old house on Poplar Street. For us, it was a big step. We actually had what looked like a real office.
We rented a big house, which we thought was just fantastic. We almost each had our own bedroom to work in.
And the firm's first project of any significance was the Fairmont Hotel.
San Antonio, a city on the move. It was back in 1980 when the Fairmont looked like it was doomed for the bulldozers. That is, until one of the best organized conservation societies in the nation stepped in. The San Antonio Conservation Society bargained for enough time to move the historic building. Almost immediately, work started on the largest move ever attempted on wheels.
No one could have bought that kind of publicity for a little startup gang of 4 people. That kind of set us up as being viewed as sort of the brash young kids at that point that opened an office and did this crazy thing. And of course we had, as we said so many times back then, we had nothing to lose.
The interview.
Somehow, now this is hazy for me, I can't explain how we got invited to be interviewed.
We were 2 Methodists, an Episcopalian, and an agnostic. Pretty much sure the Catholic Church wasn't going to hire us to do anything.
And we interviewed with a bunch of priests. The priest said, none of you are Catholics, so you don't really know anything about liturgy and the Catholic Church and the way Mass is conducted. So what makes you at all qualified to help us with this?
And I was standing up at the time, and I just turned to them and said, well, you know, the history of architecture is the history of the Catholic Church. And just went off on this long exposition about how we all know the Catholic Church because it is the history of Western architecture, and all Western architecture's focused on those big cathedrals and all the order and architecture of them. And we got the job. And they said it was pretty much that crazy answer to that question.
The design.
It was many months, and I would say it was 9 months or a year that was involved in the planning of that.
What really drove the design more than anything else was that it was a different mass than what was typically done on a papal visit. The Archbishop Flores, did the invitation from all the bishops of Texas, of the Archdiocese of Texas, as a group. And because it was everybody, his idea was all of the bishops ought to be also doing the Mass at the same time.
Because the outside Mass was going to be on a 144-acre site, we needed a way to visually ground where the Holy Father was going to be speaking.
The design really evolved around building, a very large platform. We elevated it, of course. The site was large, and to be able to kind of just to sort of know where to look, you had to have something that was impressive and big.
This wasn't a Mass inside a parish church. It was the Mass on the steps in front of a church. And so that's really what developed the concept for the overall backdrop.
Hence the idea that we came up with of creating a mission church and scaffolding.
But the actual platform and everything presented challenges because it just literally had to be at a scale that, even 10,000 of the Pope's closest friends could see him, as well as everybody else could feel like they were a part of the experience. So Jenny had designed these fantastic banners that were sort of thematic and related to all this sort of things. And so that was the kind of fantastic part about it.
And so one of the things we stumbled onto first really was the notion of using papel picado as kind of an inspiration for what the graphics might look like. It's so strongly tied to festival celebrations. We were all familiar with it as fiesta decor, but it did begin with, more church festivals.
The construction.
Okay, we know what it wants to look like, so how are we going to kind of put it together, and how are we going to do all of this kind of crazy stuff for essentially a temporary piece of architecture? So we came up with a system of really just scaffold platforms, and we kind of created the sides of it with a stretched fabric that was kind of just basically pinned in place, but it gave it this kind of really clean, bright, monolithic look. And then the scaffold towers behind were just seen as a modern colonial facade. I think they were about 110 feet tall, so really tall. And of course, as it turned out, they were carefully engineered to be disconnected from the altar, so there were these distinct structures.
The storm.
It was done. It was just amazing. It was the most amazing thing you've ever seen. It was this gigantic tower of color, and it all kind of looked like a Baroque altar. It was the weirdest thing I think any of us have ever seen. The sky started to get very, very, very black, and blacker, and it almost got dark like night. And then on the horizon, the clouds kind of part, and the sky kind of cracks open, and this bolt of sunlight comes through, this just piercing bolt of sunlight, and it becomes very bright with a big blackness on either side, and a tornado blows through. It went right for the altar, blew everything down, of course, crumbled down the tower itself.
I mean, it hadn't blown it over, it literally twisted it into the ground vertically. And then when it collapsed, it sort of pulled the other one over.
No one was in it, no one was hurt, so that was the biggest news, But then we had to figure out what to do.
With less than 72 hours before the Pope's arrival, will our heroes be able to recreate what had taken months to design and build? To find out, you'll first need to listen to this message from our sponsor.
Janet didn't know if she'd get her liver transplant in time, or that her friend's daughter Sonia would step up to be her donor. Because she didn't know it was possible for a person to donate part of their liver to save a life. Or that University Health System's Transplant Center was the only place that does this in South Texas. Now she knows University Hospital was the right place to save her life. See Janet's story at thinkingbeyond.net.
When we last left Billy, Irby, the two Mikes, and Jenny, they had just watched a freak storm blow down the backdrop they had created for the Pope's outdoor Mass in San Antonio.
We were so disappointed because our beautiful thing had been destroyed.
It was a very emotional thing, and then to get wrapped up in the disaster of the thing coming apart, which was in itself amazing because it was like 72 hours before the Mass.
And when the windstorm came through and the towers went down, what we had left were the banners that were at the entrances around the site that reflected all the dioceses of Texas.
That's when we actually went back to one of the very, very first sketches we'd ever done as a conceptual idea, which was we were going to have this kind of rigging that was going to hang these giant banners, and we were just going to prop it up with 2 cranes, and that was going to be it. And so we started getting calls from SeaWorld, construction companies all over town, and they said, well, what can we do to help? And we said, well, you have a 200-ton crane you can donate for a weekend.
And they brought over some cranes, and we rigged up a backdrop with these temporary banners that were intended for the entrances, but we used them as the background to the platform itself.
Basically sort of cannibalized banners off of the big entry gates, and then suddenly we had a backdrop.
There he is, Pope John Paul II.
The Visit.
Oh my goodness, we have seen it so many times, so many other cities, so many other parts of the world, and he is in San Antonio.
But we've never seen it or heard it with mariachi music before.
A special touch from San Antonio to Pope John Paul II. Let's just listen for a moment.
And so they said on Friday's meeting, they said, okay, tomorrow night at 10 o'clock, the site is ours. And sure enough, like 9 o'clock, head agent comes over and he goes, Mike, you got an hour. And I wasn't really in charge, but it was like we were like, where does this go? What was this? How these little last minute things? And sure enough, 10 o'clock, he says, you're done.
And then these 15 really toned, athletic young guys came in, and this was at 10 o'clock at night, and crawled all over. It was just suddenly like Navy SEALs all over the platform, and they were just all over, in everything, underneath, and crawling on the scaffolding and that, and just did this thorough survey of the platform. And then they formed a cordon, and no one else could go on to that area until the actual Pope arrived.
The day of the Mass, that Sunday, we were exhausted. We'd all been up for days, and we were sunburnt, weary of the whole project. It was Christmas for the people who were there. The looks on the faces of the people who'd come and waited and anticipated that event for so long. It was such a lesson, to me. And I think all of us took that away.
The entire event went off flawlessly. Everybody was happy. The sort of organization of the site worked. The kind of basic premises that we had kind of talked about from the beginning were very successful.
Because we had seen it complete, I think there was a tremendous amount of disappointment. I mean, it was just heartbreaking for us. It was just that it was so spectacular in place. And emotions were so intense and so mixed because we did pull it off. We did figure out what to do. We hiked up our pants and, got into the fray and solved the problem. What we really loved, and I think the thing that helped us get through it, was looking around at not only all the parishioners who were just, didn't mean anything to them that we'd been through that. They were there in rapt attention, watching this amazing man floating around through the crowd in the Pope Mobile, and I don't think any of us met him, but he was within a few feet of us, and he truly was radiant. I've never before or since met or seen anybody that had the aura that he had as a person, and it really was visible. It was palpable and real. I was stunned at that. I'd seen pictures of him, but to actually be, within a few feet of that man, it was just like, oh my God, I get this.
Thanks today to Irby Hightower, Mike Lanford, Billy Lawrence, Mike McGlone, and Jenny McChesney. You might be wondering if Irby and I are related, as we share the same last name. We've compared our family trees, and as far as we can tell, we are not. The music today was by Blue Dot Sessions. San Antonio Storybook is a production of the Rivard Report. You can find more information about this podcast and enjoy all the nonprofit journalism the Report has to offer at therivardreport.com. Until next time, I'm Brantley Hightower.